Yeah, I have one. I'm putting one in. I'd like to start a campaign to prevent Kevin Engel from going to a man bun. If anybody would like to join me, please pony up $1.
I'm in.
I'd like to see it.
Is Kevin got it?
It's going, it's getting there.
I want to see it.
I'm
Give me
in.
Anybody else with a happy dollar?
I have one, if you don't mind. So the Reams Athletic Association, we voted at our last board meeting to add field hockey to our repertoire. So we will have well, I shouldn't say just ladies. Guys could play field hockey too. We have field hockey that will be joining the Lower Dolphin League in the fall. Kim Yoakum, Brother Keith's wife, will be our commissioner. So I'm excited to bring a field hockey feeder system into Elizabethtown.
Great.
Good. Anybody else?
I had one as well. Just excited. Today is actually the last day for my youngest for school. Mount Calvary cut their school year short by a couple weeks. So we can, with a 5-year-old, homeschooling is not working. So this is just like, this is the best thing for all of us. It's going to be such a better week after today.
I have a happy dollar. I want to thank Scott Little for jumping in 2 Mondays ago, or was that last Monday? You said you'd check into a service project at the food bank, Central Pennsylvania, and it got shared with Jeff Clark and organized, and we have 10 people who are going May 15, whatever that date is. So thank you so much, Scott.
Hey, Tom. When I tried to join the meeting just by clicking on it, it came back invalid ID. Are you aware of that?
That's why people are having trouble getting in.
Okay.
And those of you who are smart and knew how to use the username of the ID and password got in, and others, it's because a question mark got dropped out of the URL. It's my fault. I will check that from now on.
Okay. I just got a text message from Dale Ressler, so he's trying to get in.
All right. Username zoom.us and username or meeting ID and password will get on it.
Okay.
Anybody else? Yeah. Go ahead, Jim. Jim, you're on mute. Anybody else?
Hey, Glenn, this is Sandra. I'm going to give 10 happy ones. 5 for the age of our granddaughter that we kidnapped for 5 days. And we are very, very happy that she spent the last 5 days with us, but we're ecstatic that she's going to go back to her very well-rested mother tomorrow morning.
That's good. Well, I've got 10. 5 for Marcico, who showed up at my house Sunday and brought me 2 beers from Twisted Vine unexpectedly. My dad and I were sitting on the front porch. Gage was sitting next to us, and he pulled up and started bitching about how he couldn't find the place. But it was very nice of him, unannounced, and it was very nice. The other is for my wife, who decided that, well, she didn't decide. I decided to get my hair cut, and she was the only one that could do it. So I'm, you know. So there's $10, and it'll never grow out. I'm just going to keep it like this the rest of my life, I think.
Glenn, don't forget that this is being recorded.
Yep, it is. A lot of fun. Anybody else? There's Ralph Dietrich. What on earth are you? What's behind you? I can't even tell.
Oh, isn't it Star Wars something?
Yeah.
Oh my Lord.
This is Star Wars Day.
Yep. All right, if there's nothing else, we'll get right to our speaker. Wendy, would you like to introduce Matt?
Yeah, well, hopefully most of you guys have met Matt. He's obviously one of our members, but he's here tonight to tell us a little bit about a book that he wrote around the making of the Blair Witch Project. So if you're not familiar with that movie, it came out, Matt will correct me, but I think the late 90s, early 2000s, somewhere in that range. And it was really a unique concept where they kind of blur this between fiction and reality, and even the whole marketing around it was just a phenomenon, because for so long, so many people thought this was a true documentary that they just found this footage and made this movie. So it was such an amazing marketing effort and a really game-changing movie. So Matt's going to share with us about how he came to write the book, some of his experiences, obviously getting it published, and share some insights with us. So I'll turn it over to you, Matt.
All right. Thank you very much, and thank you guys for having me tonight. So you're probably wondering, well, why would you write a book about the Blair Witch Project? It's one of those movies that people either love or hate. I fell in love with it because as a lifelong horror movie fan, it was probably the first movie I could remember that really stuck out as being different. I'm used to the big franchise movies, the blood, the guts, and the scary ghosts and all that stuff. And this was a movie that when I was looking at the previews, I couldn't tell you what it was about outside of students going into the woods and filming something and they were never heard from again. So in the summer of 1999, that was the summer between high school and college. So I had a lot of time to sit on the internet and try to figure out what's going on, what to expect from college. But then the more I dove into the online portion of trying to figure out what this film was, the less I came up with. So it completely enthralled me. So finally, at the end of the summer, I finally got to see this movie, and I was completely blown away by it because it wasn't anything that I had ever seen before. I didn't know what found footage was. There was no big bad monster. There was no like squirmy hide your eyes kind of thing. So when I walked out of the theater, I was like, I need to see this again. So I went back a couple days later and saw it again. And as I went to college, I just started digging more and more into the online stuff. And obviously I knew it was fake, but the way it was marketed and the conversations I had with people, it really struck a nerve with people. And throughout the years, I had run into people. I was always one of the bigger supporters of the film online with the online horror community. And it never really came up on my radar until a friend of mine made a YouTube video visiting all the locations, and I decided that, hey, I want to go visit everything. The film was made in Central and Western Maryland, maybe 2 hours from here. So I finally decided to go down to visit all the locations that I hadn't been to before, and I decided, I was like, oh, this needs an online presence. So I created a Facebook group and I started inviting friends, and then I realized that some of the cast and crew started getting in on it. I had gotten to know one of the co-directors, Eduardo Sanchez. He went to high school with a friend of mine, and I got to know him online a little bit, and he joined in, and he started inviting people whose names I was starting to recognize as cast and crew members. So as that community grew and I started to get to know people, I decided, well, would it be cool to have a weekend away where you go and visit all the locations and actually go camping in the woods where they made the film. So one year I grabbed my tent and drove into Maryland, and the only people to show up for my first event were 4 people that I had never met and that had found out about it online. Didn't know who these people were. They didn't know who I were, but they followed me all through Maryland. And at the end of the weekend, co-director Eduardo Sanchez he was very supportive and came out for the weekend. And I had asked him, I said, hey, is the studio going to do anything when the film turns 15 to kind of help celebrate, like a new Blu-ray documentary? He said, no. They don't have any plans. And that kind of stuck with me because being a fan of films, I love documentaries. I love new releases. I like to learn how they made these things. So before I realized that I was speaking, I said to him, I said, well, what if I did something? What if I wrote a book or made a documentary? And as soon as I said that, I could just feel my foot go into my mouth. And I said, oh God, what did I get into? And Ed is very nonchalant, and he goes, yeah, okay. All right. Yeah. Just let me know what you need. So I inadvertently kind of backed myself into a corner about doing some sort of behind the scenes making of about the Blair Witch. I know my limits. I'm not a filmmaker, even though I'd love to be one and I love the process. So I figured I can put pen to paper and start writing. So I started talking to him. I said, well, what do you have for me that I could use? 'Cause I didn't really know a lot about the behind the scenes stuff. So he gave me about almost a ream of paper full of documents that they had, video log, emails, transcripts, all sorts of stuff to start going through. And as I started going through it, I said, oh man, there's not going to be much here. This is going to be like a 30-page book. You know, these guys kind of backed into it. But the more I dug into it, the more I realized how much more meat was on the bone. And I started to figure out what was there that I didn't know, and that I didn't know what to ask the filmmakers to find out. So one of the things that I started doing is I literally sat down with hundreds of pages of paper, and I read through every single one of them, and I looked for dates, times, names, and places. And one thing I found when you're writing a nonfiction book is it's a lot harder than fiction because I can't make this up. So the biggest analogy I can think of in terms of how to write a nonfiction book, especially something like this, is you have a 1,000-piece puzzle, and all the pieces are laid out on the table, turned upside down. You don't know what piece goes where, and you have to pick a piece and try to figure out what that piece is and try to find out where it goes. So as I was combing through all the pages and pages and pages of documents, I started asking questions. I said, well, hey, who's this person? How does this person connect? And it started to steamroll, and I had to learn very quickly how to sharpen my Google skills, because there was one thing I learned is you can go down that Google rabbit hole till 3 a.m. and come up with 400 web pages of things that you had never known was there. So one of the things I started doing is I was bookmarking stuff and writing names down. So my notes started to grow and grow and grow. And I had to figure out what I wanted to cover. There were the personal parts about the film that made me love it, but I had to balance that between what I wanted to talk about and what was actually there. Because again, it's a nonfiction story. It's not my story to tell. So when you have 5 principal filmmakers who made this movie come alive, plus the cast and the extra crew, you're looking at 35 to 50 people minimum to talk to and tell their story. So I had to figure out who to talk to and what to talk to them about. So I basically decided that I needed to build a timeline of when the film was generated, when the idea started, and when we got to the end in the summer of 1999 when the film was released. So starting at the beginning, I said, okay, I'm going to look at this person and talk to them and build this timeline out and find out what dates that I have and start to figure out where my holes were. Because that was important, because if I didn't have a timeline, I knew that I would start talking to someone and realize that there was probably more I should be talking to them about, and I wouldn't be prepared for it. And I didn't want to go into an interview and have to say, oh, I'm sorry, can I come back to that at a later time? I wanted to be as prepared as I could. So as I built a timeline, I started to realize, okay, this person is here, and I started making the connections. And trying to get people to remember something from 20 years ago can be pretty hard if you just kind of drop in on them. So I learned early on with my interviewing to, when I reach out to them and introduce myself and tell them what I'm trying to do, try to really pre-position the topics and everything I was talking about, because I didn't have an agent. I'm not a writer. I don't have a publisher, an agent, or any sort of history. So I kind of have to sell myself and say, hey, look, I know the filmmakers. They've allowed me to write this book. Would you please talk to me about it? I was grateful, or I was thankful enough that almost every single person I reached out to got back to me and allowed me to interview them based on no previous knowledge of me at all. There were a lot of times where I found out that, some of these people would reach out to other people and say, hey, who's this Matt Blazi guy? He wants to talk to me about the movie. And a lot of the directors, the producers and stuff would have to go to bat for me. So that really gave me a boost of confidence that this is something that I could do, considering I sometimes figure if I hadn't been dating my wife in college, I'd still be in college because my papers were just not the best worded essays and stuff. So I had a challenge in front of me. Reaching out to people, it can be rough because you don't know the personal relationships that people have had or have today. So you kind of have to tread water very lightly and try to do some research to figure out, are there any outstanding issues that you don't want to touch? Because you don't want to not know something and ask them a question and have them hang up, because that could really hinder your investigation and writing. My first interview was with a gentleman named John Pearson, and he had a show on IFC called Split Screen. And he was prominent in the 90s with indie filmmaking. He helped really turn the spotlight on Spike Lee, Kevin Smith, and all these guys. And his show was one of the first places where the Blair Witch Project was put on TV. And 10 minutes into my first interview, he's like, this is off the record. And he just goes on this 10-minute tirade about one of the producers of the film. And I had no idea who he was talking about, why he was so angry. But I'd sit there and I had to listen to it. So I said, okay, this is going to be interesting. So the more I reached out to people, the more I started building connections and building these relationships. And they would say, well, have you talked to so-and-so? No, I haven't. Oh, okay, well, I'll go talk to him. So over the course of the 4 years that I wrote the book, I probably interviewed almost 40 people, some of them 4 or 5 times, depending on what their involvement in the film was. And each interview, some interviews were 10 minutes, some were 2 and 3 hours long. So it was a lot of on the phone and a lot of talking. When you deal with, like I said, when you deal with nonfiction, it's like the biggest research paper you're ever going to write. Not only did they give me, a stack of paperwork, they also gave me hundreds of hours of behind the scenes footage that they had shot, filming themselves, filming the movie, editing, telephone conversations, film festivals, meetings, interviews, but they gave them to me on tape, on a high 8 tape from 1997. So I had to sit there and digitize over 100 hours of footage to DVD and digital files in real time. So that took months to do, but it gave me a lot of time to sit there and listen, because I got more info. I was getting like the at the time knowledge and name dropping, so that once I realized I had that, I could call up one of the producers and said, hey, you said about so-and-so on this day and this day, give me more info, which really helped out. And that kind of opened the floodgates. The film, when it was released, was only 82 minutes long, but they actually shot 22 hours of footage in the film over a course of 8 days. I watched all that footage a couple of times because there was a lot of nuances in there that didn't make it to screen that I wanted to uncover. I didn't want it to be a tabloid book because I didn't feel that it would be fair to sensationalize any sort of issues or interpersonal problems or professional issues. And that was one thing I decided to really lead with. I said, look, this is going to be as straight down the middle as possible, because I feel that your story is important and you're allowing me to tell the story. This isn't going to be the National Enquirer. And I think that helped put a lot of people at ease, because I wasn't looking for dirt. I wasn't looking for, oh, well, you had a fight with so-and-so. What was that like? What's your personal relationship like? It wasn't about that. Because of that, they let their guard down, and we actually got to talk on a very personal level, and they were able to offer up a lot of information to me versus so-and-so from the local newspaper or the USA Today. So that really helped out a lot. Probably one of the biggest challenges I had with writing the book was actually writing the book. When you get done with 35, 40 people's worth of interviews and you've got hundreds of hours of transcribed notes, you have to sit there and comb through everything. And sitting down to write a paragraph sometimes could take me an hour, because I didn't want it to sound like someone was reading vacuum cleaner instructions or, a history book. I really wanted it to have a narrative. I wanted it to have a voice. And it was hard for me because I'm not a writer. And I didn't want it to sound, on this day, this person said this and did this, and they went here and they had a good time. I really wanted to try to find the story. So I paid a lot of attention to how people were talking to me when certain topics came up, and I would make notes, very excited, struggles with, had a hard time with, so that I knew that when I was quoting them in the book, I was quoting them accurately, but also passing that tone along in my words that they were giving to me verbally over the phone. It was hard to do, because in terms of writing, because you have to keep everything in line, and I had to write it in order. I couldn't go out of order, because if I'm writing about something that happened in 1999, I might need something from 1997. So I had to go in order. And the further I got into it, the more the flow was able to go, and the more that people were offering up information. I didn't have to dig as much anymore. Some of it was a challenge because a lot of people came to me late in the game to finally get back to me for their interviews that took 2 or 3 years to actually get them to get back to me due to either scheduling, or they're not on Facebook, or they don't answer their emails, or they just, pass it over. One of the principal stars, the female lead, she was the only person who never answered my request for an interview. And a lot of people think, well, that's weird because her face is everywhere. There's a lot of behind the scenes issues that arose from the film being released that have kind of made it, she doesn't really care about it anymore. And I knew that because I've met her and talked to her over the years, but she did not want to be interviewed for the book. But I made sure to put a footnote in there because I don't want people to think, well, why didn't you ask? Well, I did. She just chose not to respond. So that's probably my biggest regret in terms of this whole project, is that I didn't really get to talk to her because I had some really good questions about her and her approach that I really wanted to get to. But on the flip side, one of the biggest things that I wanted to find out, and this was where my personal wants and needs came in, there was an interview in the movie of this mom and this little girl. And come to find out is they weren't planted actors. The cast actually stopped her on the street and asked her, say, have you ever heard of the Blair Witch? And on a dime, she comes up with this story. And she goes into this, well, I saw this special on the TV and everything. And her daughter keeps trying to cover her mouth. And she's saying like, no. She's like 2 at the time. I wanted to find out who they were, and I couldn't find it. And I spent a month trying to figure out who she was. And here I come to find out I had footage of her giving her real name because she ended up being miscredited in the movie. So the director texted me, said, hey, are you still looking for the mom? I said, yeah. And he goes, hey, well, here's her name. I just ran into someone that knows her. And I immediately got on Facebook and sent her a message, and we were having lunch in 2 days afterwards. So that was kind of like my biggest thing, was like I wanted to make all these connections. I wanted to find out who these people were, which just absolutely was one of the best things ever. If I hadn't found out who the mom and the little girl were, I probably would have felt the book was incomplete, because they always ended up being a fan favorite. Fans always talk about that interview a lot. And to this day, they are 2 of my absolute best friends. I talk to them all the time, and they are super excited to be an accidental star of the movie. I ended up self-publishing the book because I had a self-imposed deadline of October of last year for when the film turned 20. And I wanted to have it out in October of 2019 to help coincide with the film celebration, because there was a lot of screening events and stuff all over the country. Sundance, where the film premiered, had one that I went to. The theater in Orlando that the filmmakers worked at, they had one that I went to. And I said, I need to have this book out this year. I'm friends with a lot of authors, and I had gotten in touch with the studio who told me off the record that if I wanted to go through them and have their approval and use whatever I wanted, it would have been a 6-figure sum that I would have had to pay to get this book out, which is why the book has the unauthorized story at the top, because the studio isn't involved. It's authorized by all the filmmakers, but he said, off the record, if you put that on there, we're probably not going to look at it. So it's kind of nice to know that, but I kind of wish I would have had some involvement from the studio. Like I said, self-publishing, I went right through Amazon. It's been a great place for a lot of people who are looking to write a book. They have great tools on how to lay it out, what it's going to look like, and give you a lot of options. An author friend of mine helped me lay it out, and he actually really kicked open the door on some design that I probably would have never done. And instantly, when I uploaded it to Amazon, it gives you a proof and you can look at it and everything. I found out 2 days later, because I didn't announce that it was published, that one of my friends had found it and bought it off Amazon and sent me a picture. And that was the first time that I realized that what I was doing was real, because before then it's in Microsoft Word, it's on your computer. There's no physical copy there. It's when it's yours and you're reading it, it's one thing, but when someone actually goes out and spends money on your book and they get a copy of it and they're excited, that's really when it felt real to me. More so than when I typed the end. I found that writing a book, especially nonfiction, is one of the most time-consuming and mentally exhausting things I could have ever done, but also one of the more satisfying. When I have people that are reaching out to me that I've never heard of, never met, say, "Oh, I really love your book. Thank you for writing it." There's a big smile that comes across my face as a sense of accomplishment because I feel like I've created something. I'm not an artist. I'm not a filmmaker, but that's one of the greatest things that I've gotten to do is help build a community around this film. I've met some of my best friends all over the world because of this film, and it's my way of giving back. Because people want to know more. They love to buy movies. They love to buy books. So I figured I'd try to marry the two and really tell the filmmakers how much I appreciate what they did, because it seems kind of weird sometimes when you talk about a movie and how it changed your life. It changed my life because it gave me great friendships, gave me great experiences, and I wanted to find some way to pay these guys back, and I did it in a book. It's really weird sometimes to say that, I sat there and wrote a book, and my wife has to keep reminding me. She goes, "No, honey, you did it." And I keep thinking, I didn't do it. Cause I found out real quick that, when they say, an artist looks at a painting and they see all the flaws, I do the same thing. I know it's done, but then I look back and I go, what if I'd have said this, or what if I'd have put this here, or if I'd have made this choice? I had to come to terms with being satisfied with it real fast, but it's one of those things that you just got to go do it. If you say you want to write a book or make a movie or paint a painting, you just have to go and do it. And that's what I did. I just sat down, literally opened up Microsoft Word and typed chapter 1 and just figured it out as I went along. There's no manual that I learned, and you kind of have to make it your own. But yeah, it was one of the coolest things I've ever done in my life, and I'm glad that I did it. I'm also glad it's over, because as I got done, people said, "Well, what's next?" I said, "Nothing. There's no way I'm ever doing this again unless someone actually pays me to do it," because it was a lot of time and effort, and it wasn't about anything else other than saying I could do it and getting it done and having people read it. So yeah, that's what it's kind of like to write a book about a movie, because it's like I said, it's definitely an interesting experience. Fiction is one thing, but nonfiction is completely different because you're telling someone else's story, and you have to double check and recheck yourself and make sure you keep copious amounts of notes, because it's real quick to drop a note somewhere and can't remember who said it or where it goes. And then you got to almost start from scratch for that day, and you could waste a whole day if you're not organized. So, but no, that's pretty much all I have regarding the book. Anyone has questions?
I'm sure a bunch of people have some questions, and I'm going to start. When you were done and you sent it, did somebody proofread it before it was done, or is it just done?
Oh no, it needed to be proofread. I actually sent it. I sent it to a couple of friends. I sent it to one friend to read for content, because he actually transcribed all of my interviews. So he knew the content front and back. So he sat at his computer listening to an interview at half speed and typed it up for me. I said, "All right, now you've heard everything. Now make sure I'm not missing anything." And then I sent it to 2 friends for multiple passes for editing.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, Bill Davis here. Hey, Matt, I'm not super familiar with this film. I'm aware of it, but is there a cult following in this film?
I want to say yes. It's sometimes a niche film. Like when you hear the words found footage, any article that is talking about a found footage movie is going to reference the Blair Witch Project. One thing I found is whether you saw it, or I'm sorry, let me back up. Whether you loved it or hated it, you remember seeing it. And the people that love it really celebrate the uniqueness of the film, because literally they sent kids into the woods for 8 days with a camcorder and a film camera. And that is the footage we shot. Everything is done in almost one take. So the way that, and like Wendy had said, the marketing, so many people believed it was true because they didn't come out and tell you it wasn't. And they didn't come out and tell you it was. They just said, here's this footage we found. Go watch it. And that's why a lot of marketing today, when we talk viral marketing, they are considered the first viral marketing movie campaign, but they didn't set out to be viral.
That's quite unique, it seems to me. We always heard about a film being made from a book. Here is a book being written about a film. That's reverse.
Hey, Matt.
Yes.
Kevin Saver. How long the duration of actually physically writing the book, and how long is that?
The whole project from start to finish, from the day I opened my mouth and said, hey, I want to write a book, till it came out, was just about 4 years. Physically sitting and typing the book, I really started hammering it in August of 2018, and I finished up in March of 2019. And that's, writing 3-4 hours a day sometimes, and then sometimes more and sometimes less. Because like I said, sometimes a paragraph might take me an hour to get out because I just don't know how to make it worded right. But then some days the words flowed like water, and I could write 3-4 pages in a day.
Matt,
following up on what Bill said, I remember the movie very well. It was very difficult to watch because of the rawness of the video that was shot. But the cult following of it was more before it came out than actually after, because the trailers were so enticing, or they raised your curiosity. What the heck is this thing about? That after you saw it, it was kind of like, oh yeah, that was interesting. But the intensity was more before you actually saw the film.
Oh yeah, the gentleman I talked about, John Pearson, he had a message board on his website, and when he aired a 8-minute teaser trailer of footage that wasn't even in the film, it was made just to tease, to raise money, his website kept crashing because so many people came to it and wanted to know about it that he literally called the filmmakers. He said, get off my website and make your own. And so they made their first website about the movie, where they would just drop a hint here or there, and they would interact on the message boards. And it was a very organic type of marketing. It was just, hey, we have a crowd, let's give them stuff here and there and keep them on the line so we can get this out.
Matt, did they have a script, or just an outline of what they wanted to do? You said they shot hours and hours of footage, and then it was kind of a short film. So what did they have structurally to work with?
So they came up with an entire mythology. They created the town of Blair, and then Ellie Kedward, the Blair Witch, and all of these historical moments. And they basically said, okay, they gave the 3 actors very, very little information about the history, because they wanted them to discover it themselves. So everything in the movie, there's no script. Everything is improv.
It's improv, yeah.
Everything. Now, there were planted actors that got interviewed at the beginning of the film that were basically given 2, 3, 4 paragraphs. Hey, your name is Ed Swanson, and you're a local guy who really doesn't believe, but my father-in-law does. And he goes, oh, I think that's BS, whatever, But then some of the people that they interviewed just came up with stuff on their own. But they built a whole mythology around this fictional world, but gave so very little to the filmmakers because they didn't want them to overact. They wanted them to get as a natural response out of that time as they could.
Matt, question about just the found footage genre. I know, like, that this is the movie I think when I think of found footage, but I know there's been other ones. Has any other found footage movie gotten this kind of popularity, or was this kind of a once and done kind of thing for the genre?
Popular, well, it depends on how you define popularity. I mean, Blair Witch is kind of infamous. Like I said, it's you either love it or hate it, but it's kind of ground zero for the found footage genre. A lot of times when people think of found footage, they think of stuff like Paranormal Activity, which came out 8 years after the Blair Witch Project did. It's, there's the money-making franchises like the Paranormal Activities, movies like Cloverfield, and there's been a slew of others. I find that a lot of found footage films in this day and age are VOD, video on demand. Eduardo Sanchez, co-director, actually made a movie about Bigfoot, and he did it in the found footage genre with GoPros. So that the found footage genre it's real tough to get right. And it's real tough to really suspend your disbelief as to why people are still filming, especially in this day and age when we all walk around with our cell phones and film everything we can. But why would you keep rolling? And that's the biggest challenge with this genre is giving a reason why the camera is still rolling. But it's still, like I said, it's ground zero. Anyone that makes a found footage movie, you're immediately going to get compared to the Blair Witch Project.
Hey, Matt, so this film, you know, if I recall, it was budgeted around 60,000, I think, to make it, and it made close to $250 million. So are these people doing anything, or did they just sit back and, like, have any of them gone on to do anything else, like any of the actors or anything like that, or did they just kind of live off of this phenomenon?
No, they're all still working. Like I said, director Eduardo Sanchez made tons of other feature films, but he's actually found a second career in TV. If you've watched Supernatural,
yeah,
he's done half a dozen episodes, if not more, of Supernatural. Queen of the South, a lot of serialized TV. Other co-director Dan Myrick is working on feature films. Heather kind of got out of films. Like I said, there's a lot of issues there that I unfortunately can't go into. So she kind of shunned Hollywood after that. One of the actors, Joshua Leonard, he was on Bates Motel for almost a whole season. He was in the Steven Soderbergh movie Unsane recently. Mike, the other gentleman from the film, he's a high school guidance counselor, but he was just on FBI on CBS last year. So he usually does acting in the summer. But a lot of the filmmakers still do a lot of production. You know, they've moved into the online stuff, the alternative reality games that kind of coincide with the movies and TV shows where you can go online and get immersed in the world. Mm-hmm. They've done a lot of that. But yeah, they're all still very active.
Cool. Thanks.
Matt, I was looking this up on Amazon, and the reviews on it are really good for you. Yeah, they've given you great kudos, and if anybody hasn't seen it, that's what it's called. But I walked out of The Exorcist when I was a teenager. I'm not. No, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you for doing that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was. Part of the reason I think why it took me so long to finish writing it is because I knew the filmmakers themselves were going to read my book, and when you, as an 18-year-old kid, if you'd have told me by the time I was in my late 30s that I would be friends with the filmmakers of one of my favorite movies and they would be allowing me to do this, I would have laughed at you. But when it became a reality, I was like, oh my God, what if I say the wrong thing? You know, or what if I touch on something that strikes a nerve? And that's why I spent a lot of time trying to prepare the interviews and try to make sure that I was as down the middle with the representation of everybody as I could be. Because they would call me up and be like, hey, did you talk to so-and-so? Or, hey, I forgot, let's talk about this next time. So I knew they were into it. So I wanted to make sure that it was as good for them as it would be for the fans so that everybody got something out of it.
And I have a question.
Sure.
A year from now, it would be interesting to have you come back and tell us, how did it go with Amazon? What has the sales been like? What have the comments been like? What have the reviews been like? Have you gone on a tour, book signing thing? Or, I mean, what's the story? Give us an update.
Yeah, I mean, I have some of that now. I mean, it's, you know, the self-publishing is interesting. I know it's, you know, Amazon takes a cut, but the reviews are good. I haven't had any issues. I can edit the book at any time I want and re-upload the file, and the next person that buys it will get the updated edition. So if I find a typo, I can go back in and fix it. I've even teased about doing a 25th anniversary edition of the book in hopes of getting Heather on board to talk about it and adding anything else that I could think of that would be worthy for people to have that edition. So far, it's been okay. I've had a lot of people ask me about book signings. I did one. I've done probably 3 or 4 in the fall, obviously before we weren't allowed to leave the house, and they were interesting. So it's interesting. But yeah, I could always give an update on that because who knows what it's going to be like with Amazon after a while.
Matt, have you had to make any major changes in the text? Have you found anything that you really hated you had to fix?
I sent an early draft to one of the producers, And he got back to me and he actually called me. He goes, "Hey, I want to talk to you." And I was like, "Oh man, Greg wants to call me. This can't be good." And he's like, "Well, you wrote in this chapter here that it was, Ben Rock. He was one of the production designers." And he goes, "Well, you said Ben this and Ben this and Ben this." And he goes, "Well, that was me." I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah." So I went back and I looked at the notes for that chapter, that part, because I had everything broken down. I said, "You know why? Because Ben was really the only person to talk about that time." So I took the interview and applied it to who was saying it rather than who did it. So, he was like, "Oh, I just want to make sure that it's right and accurate." And one of the other producers said to me, he goes, "Don't forget, we're all the hero of our own story." He's like, so just make, he's like, "You're fine." He goes, "I didn't catch anything." I said, "Okay, well, thanks." Cause I would hate to misquote someone, but no, I didn't really have to go back and change anything that anyone kind of caught on. That's why I had a friend of mine read it for content who was helping me along, cause he kind of knew who said what. And whatnot. So that kind of helped avoid any major, like, "Oh my God, I have to go rewrite an entire chapter" panics.
And you haven't had to do that since you published either. Then.
No one's came back to me and said anything. I was always a little worried about that. In all honesty, I'm more worried about my grammar and sentence structure and usage than I am content. But other than that, no one's actually come back. Some people have come and said, "Oh my God, can you tell me more about this topic?" Because there were some things I just didn't do the deep dive as I wanted to. So it's nice to have people that want to know more about certain things.
Well, we really appreciate it, Matt. It's a very fascinating story.
Well, thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Does anybody have anything for the good of the group? Any announcements? If not, just remember, support local businesses, stay safe, and as Rachel Levin says, wash your freaking hands.
Wash your hands.
Stay safe, 6 feet apart, people. See ya.
Bye.
Thank you. See you. Bye.
Thanks, Matt.
Bye.
Bye.